Bava Batra, Daf Samach Bet, sadness in lost, joy in gain. Kol המתאבל Yerushalayim. We finish Perek Cheskas Abatim today, and whenever we finish a Perek or Masechta, I feel a pang of sadness. And that's why we say, Hadran Allah Cheskas, may we come back to you. We don't want to leave you. We want to come back. When you've enjoyed a Perek or a Masechta as much as we enjoy it together, you get so connected to it. It is so beautiful. You can't wait to open it every morning. And then you're on to the next thing. And there's a sense of loss. But we need to understand that loss and gain, or the sadness and joy, are the same emotion. They're just different points on a spectrum. Somebody who can't feel sadness can't feel joy. Somebody who feels joy deeply feels sadness deeply as well. It comes from the same place. I remember when I was a boy in yeshiva, and I've said to you, in those days when you went to yeshiva, you went for at least a year. You didn't have much contact with home. It was only through letters. It was really a wrench. And there were times when, as a young boy, I felt incredibly homesick. And I wouldn't speak to my parents about it because I thought that would just make them feel bad. And so you just live with it. And I remember the way I coped with it was saying to myself, I feel so bad for the boys who don't have homesickness. What must it be like to be away from home and have nothing to miss? And what a privilege it is to be homesick and to find in that sadness the place of joy, because joy and sadness are connected there, and we'll see in our sugya how that plays out. We work with two psukim. The one is in Yeshayahu, Simchu et Yerushalayim v'gilu ba, take pleasure and joy in Yerushalayim, kol ohavea, all who love it. Sisu atam asos, have joy, you with joy, kol hamit'ablim alea, all who mourn for it. So here we see the joy in the morning in the same posuk. In Tehillim we've got Tidbak Leshoni Lichikim Lo Eskereni Im Lo A'aleh Yerushalayim Al Rosh Simchati. This is the famous posuk of Im Eshkachech Yerushalayim. If I don't raise Yerushalayim up at the height of my joy. Those are the two psukim that we're going to be working with. And we have this piece of Gemara here in Bava Batra, where there were some very frum people who, when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, stopped eating meat and stopped drinking wine. They took on a whole lot of behaviors as an act of mourning for the Beis HaMikdash. Rabbi Yeshua gets hold of them and says, you're going too far. If you're going to stop eating meat and you're going to stop drinking wine, then don't eat bread because we don't have the lechem todo anymore. And stop drinking water because we don't have the nisuch hamayim anymore. You can't live like that. Yes, we're meant to feel sad, but you're not meant to stop living. So the Gemara then discusses, so what are we supposed to do? And the Gemara says, not to mourn at all, you can't do. To over mourn, you can't do. So what are we meant to do? And we can't mourn too much. A very important principle in Psak. You don't make a gzeira, you don't legislate for the community if the majority of the community will be unable to observe that legislation. You don't put them in that situation. And to introduce a level of mourning that most people can't live with, we can't do that. They can't make such a gzeira. So what do we do? So this is where the practice comes from. Sad adam et beito b'sidr mishayer bo davar muat. When you're plastering the walls of your new home, leave a little bit that isn't plastered. The Gemara discusses how much. When you're making a su'udah, you're making a banquet, leave something out. If you were going to make 10 courses, make 9. If you were going to make 4 different dishes for the main course, make 3. Do something that just reduces the level of joy a little bit. A woman is beautifying herself, do one thing a little bit less. The practice of putting ash on the chosen's head at the wedding, breaking the glass, these are all part of the same principle. And what's important here is there's no requirement, as you'll see from the Gemara, to remove plaster from your wall to have a place Zechel Mikdash. It's not about doing something as an act of mourning. It's about reducing joy. Im lo elet Yerushalayim al rosh simchati. When I'm at the height of joy, let me remember Yerushalayim and tone the joy down, dial the joy down just one notch. So when you're celebrating the completion of your home, you do a little bit less celebration. You don't have to go and wreck your home for Yerushalayim. The woman doesn't have to take her makeup off for Yerushalayim. When she's doing herself up, you leave a little bit off. You don't have to go around shattering glasses to remember Yerushalayim every day, break a glass. No, but when you're at the height of your simcha, you do something to reduce the simcha a little bit. That's all that we can do, says the Gemara. And then the Gemara goes on to the part that we'll deal with. V'chol hamitavel al Yerushalayim zocheh v'roeh b'simchata. And anybody who mourns over Yerushalayim will be meritorious and will see the joy of its rebuilding. Shenemar simchu et Yerushalayim. Tanya Rabbi Shishmol ben Elisha says, "Miyom shecharav Beit Hamikdash dinu shenigzor al atzmenu shelo nechol basav lo lishtot yain." It's correct. We should have made a gezerah when the temple was destroyed. We should have legislated no meat and no wine, like the 9 days. That should have been all the time. But again, we don't do that if most people can't stand by it. And from the time that there's been a bad government who's decreed things against us, doesn't allow us to keep Torah, like in parts of Europe at certain times, in Russia at certain times. They don't allow bris and pidyon habeins or whatever. We should stop people marrying. We should say, in that case, if you can't give a bris to your son, don't get married. And then you'll find there'll be no Jews in the world. Rather let the Jews do something b'shogeg than b'mezid. Rather let them do it unintentionally than intentionally. If we made a law that you can't get married, they would knowingly disregard the law and get married nevertheless, because that's what people would do, and you would be causing people to do something to go against the gezerah. So rather, just leave it alone. Why does the Gemara introduce a new idea? Hanach laim Yisrael. Rather let people do it by mistake than do it deliberately. Why don't we stay with the original idea of a gezerah that most of the people can't stand by? So we're giving a reason for that. Why are you not allowed to legislate a law that the majority of the community can't stand by? Because by doing that, you will cause the majority of the community to deliberately go against the legislation of the rabbis. And you don't legislate in a way that will trip the majority of people up. The Chassam Sofer says that's only if it's the majority. If the majority will stand by a law, if the rabbis want to introduce a law, and the majority will accept it, but there'll be some people who will deliberately go against it, says the Chassam Sofer, that's tough luck, then they'll go against it. You don't withhold yourself from improving society because you're afraid of a small minority, no matter how vocal they are. We know today that minorities can be very vocal. It doesn't matter if they're vocal. If it's a minority, you don't worry about them. They must do their own thing. You've got to look at the majority of the community. We have a parallel sugya in Gemara Tainis, where Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says anybody who eats and drinks on Tisha B'Av, it's as if he's eaten or drunk on Yom Kippur. Rabbi Akiva says anybody who does malacha, who works on Tisha B'Av morning, doesn't see Siman Brocha. And so it goes on. And as it says, anybody who doesn't mourn for Yerushalayim, will not see its joy. Because of the posuk. Mikan amru, from here we learn, says the Gemara in Tainis, Kol hamitavel Yerushalayim zocheh v'roeh b'simchata. Anybody who mourns for Jerusalem's loss will rejoice in its rebuilding. And there the Gemara adds a phrase, V'she'eino mitabel al Yerushalayim. And if you do not mourn for Yerushalayim, eino roeh b'simchata, you will not see the simcha of Yerushalayim. So these are the two parallel sugyas. Bava Batra and Tainis, very similar. The Riaz is the grandson of the Tosfos Rid. Remember, we've talked about the Tosfos Rid recently quite a lot from Italy. The Riaz was also in Italy. The way we knew about the Riaz and his work was through the work of Rabbi Yeshua Boaz, who was the Shiltei Giborim, who wrote important notes on the Rif in the 16th century. And without Rabbi Yeshua Boaz, until recently, we wouldn't have even known about the Riaz. Most of what we knew about the Riaz's comments came through the Shiltei Giborim. This Shiltei Giborim is an amazing person. And we don't realize, because he didn't write these big works, but he opened Shas for us. He made Shas accessible. He was the first hyperlinker. So what we use all the time, one of the Sforim that we use most of all after Rashi and Tosfos is the Masoros HaShas, for example. Whenever the Gemara quotes another Gemara somewhere, where do you find it? Unless you know the whole of Shas by heart, where would you find it? You look at the Masoros HaShas. Who wrote that? Rabbi Yeshua Boaz wrote that. And if you want to know where's the Rambam, where's the Shulchan Aruch, you look in the Ein Mishpat. Who wrote the Ein Mishpat? Rabbi Yeshua Boaz wrote the Ein Mishpat. You want to know where a posuk is? How do you know the posuk? We just look on the side and they bring the posuk. Rabbi Yeshua Boaz brought the posuk. Everywhere there was a reference. So Tosfos brings another Gemara, which he does all the time, but he didn't say where the Gemara is. Rabbi Yeshua Boaz added the reference. So he made the whole of Shas, he hyperlinked it all and made it all accessible. He did that in his 20s. And he didn't have computers, and he was able to go through the whole of Shas and make all of these connections. It's unbelievable. And through him, we know about the Riyaz. Later on, we found manuscripts. So here, Rabbi Yeshua Boaz was in Spain. His family was in Spain at the time of the expulsion. And they then went to Italy. And probably when he got to Italy, he found manuscripts of the Riyaz. That's probably how he came to write about the Riyaz, and we came to learn about the Riyaz. So the Riyaz on our Gemara in Bava Batra, and the Piskei HaRiyaz, quotes the Gemara from Tainis. Our Gemara doesn't give that second part. And if you don't mourn for Jerusalem, you won't rejoice for Jerusalem. That addition our Gemara doesn't have, but the Riyaz brings it in. In other words, once again, he sees these two sugyas of Gemara, the Gemara in Tainis and the Gemara in our Gemara at the end of Cheskas Habatim, as part of the same sugya. It's something that you have to learn together. We see that further in the Ein Mishpat. Again, this is Rabbi Yeshua Boaz. So the Ein Mishpat is also, it's not just that he referenced. The Ein Mishpat is he tells you where in Shulchan Aruch you'll find this law, where in the Rambam you'll find this law. But it's not only that. You can understand how he learns the Gemara as well. So on this Gemara, he references the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Taf Kuf Nun Daled in Orach Chaim, which is the laws of Tisha B'Av. So although our Gemara does not mention Tisha B'Av, our Gemara is talking about what to do at a wedding and what to do when you're entertaining guests and whether you should stop eating meat and drinking wine altogether. There's no mention of Tisha B'Av in our Gemara. But the Ein Mishpat references Taf Kuf Nun Daled as he does in Gemara Tainis. So the Ein Mishpat, that same Rabbi Yeshua Boaz, who is a master of the Riyaz, who we've just learned, also clearly learns the Gemara in Tainis and the Gemara in Bava Batra as the same topic, dealing with the same topic. Both of them paskened in Shulchan Aruch in the laws of Tisha B'Av in Siman Taf Kuf Nun Daled. And what do we see there? The laws in Shulchan Aruch, Kol ha'ochel v'shoteh b'Tisha B'Av. This is the Shulchan Aruch that the Ein Mishpat is referencing. Anybody who eats and drinks on Tisha B'Av, eino ro'eh b'simchat Yerushalayim, will not rejoice in the rebuilding of Jerusalem. V'chol ha'mit'abel al Yerushalayim zocheh v'ro'eh b'simchata. This is in the Shulchan Aruch itself, but somebody who mourns correctly for Jerusalem will participate in the rejoicing of its rebuilding. Now, what's interesting is, on the Shulchan Aruch, you've got the Be'er HaGoyla. The Be'er HaGoyla is the great-grandfather of the Vilna Gaon. And the Be'er HaGoyla, on every paragraph of the Shulchan Aruch, links it to its source in the Gemara. And this Shulchan Aruch in Hilchos Tisha B'Av that we've just learned, what would you expect him to reference? What should the Be'er HaGoyla bring? He should bring both Gemaras. He should say, see Tainis Daf Lamed and see Bava Batra Daf Samach. That's where the two sugyas are, but he doesn't. He only brings Tainis. For the laws of Tisha B'Av, he brings as the source the Braisa in Tainis Daf Lamed Amud Beis. So is it possible that the Be'er HaGoyla sees these two sugyas as separate and different? We'll see furthermore that is so, because in Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Aleph, the first chapter of Shulchan Aruch, what we just learned, the laws of Tisha B'Av. The laws of Tisha B'Av are in the 554th chapter of Orach Chaim. But that's right near the end. But if you go to the very beginning of Orach Chaim, in the very first chapter of Orach Chaim, it says, Ra'ui l'chol yarei shamayim. It is appropriate for every serious Jew. Sheyeh meitzar v'doeg al churban Beit HaMikdash. You should feel sad and a sense of loss at the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. This is an unusual piece of Shulchan Aruch, because usually the Shulchan Aruch deals with actions, with expressions, with what you have to do. It's very seldom that the Shulchan Aruch deals with what you have to feel. And here the Shulchan Aruch just says it's correct to feel sadness and loss. Says the Vilna Gaon, where does that come from? That comes from our Gemara in Bava Batra. So the Vilna Gaon does not learn Bava Batra has anything to do with Tisha B'Av. He and his great-grandfather separate the two sugyas. The Gemara in Tainis is talking about Tisha B'Av. And the actions, the practices, the rituals of Tisha B'Av, what you have to do on Tisha B'Av, how far you have to go. Our Gemara explores, are there any actions beyond Tisha B'Av? And it says limited actions. When you're at the height of your joy, you reduce actions. It's not about doing something to express your sadness. It's about not doing. It's about reducing, about dialing down your joy. It's not about dialing up your sadness during the year other than Tisha B'Av. However, there is something else, and that's from the Siman Aleph, as the Vilna Gaon explains. You do have to feel sadness every single day. That you don't do anything about it. You don't perform acts of mourning, but you feel sadness every single day. If the two sugyas are different, and Tainis is talking about Tisha B'Av, and we're talking about every day, does the same principle apply on the everyday part? Somebody who doesn't feel the loss of Yerushalayim every day won't participate in the rejoicing. Is that so? Because that's really developed in Gemara Tainis. Says the Chasam Sofer, you don't need the Gemara in Tainis. You can learn it directly out of the Pasuk. The Michlal Heinat HaShomei Alav. You can deduce it. Somebody who doesn't mourn won't rejoice in the rebuilding. Perush you need to know, he says, that you won't be part of the rejoicing, but you'll see it. You'll see everybody else rejoicing, and you won't be part of it. That's what happens if you haven't participate in the sadness. You won't feel the joy. You'll see what's happening, but you won't be part of that joy. And you can learn that from the Pasuk itself. You don't need the Gemara in Tainis. What we see here in the approach of the Vilna Gaon and of his great-grandfather Be'er HaGola, that this Gemara is talking, our Gemara at the end of Cheskas Habatim, is talking about an inner place of what you feel. Just yesterday, by chance, I listened to a remarkable lecture by, it was really a shiur, not a lecture, by Professor Moshe Halbertal. And he was talking about Hilchos Avelus according to the Rambam. And he spoke about the Rambam's view that the laws of mourning are really an expression of missing. Because if you don't miss somebody who's died, you make their life what he called weightless. What kind of weight could the life have had if when you lose the person, he's not missed? So missing, the sadness of missing, is a way to retrospectively give value to what you had, to what it was. If you have something that you value and you lose it, you're sad, you're upset, you're frustrated. If you don't care, you've lost it, it's gone, okay, move on. Then did you ever really enjoy it? Because joy and sadness are different points on the same spectrum of emotion. If you feel sadness, you feel joy. If you feel joy, you feel sadness. If you're neutral, you feel neither joy nor sadness. And that might be a comfortable way to go through life, but it means you're going through life without joy as well. And it's the same with the Yerushalayim. This is apart from the laws of expressing mourning for Yerushalayim, which is in Paskin at the end of Orach Chaim. In the first chapter of Orach Chaim, there's the inner place that we're meant to feel the missing. We need to feel that we're missing something, that there's something we don't have. Because if you don't feel the missing of Yerushalayim, then you don't appreciate what Yerushalayim is altogether. And so it is that we need to appreciate in everything that we do, is to be able to, sometimes even to be able to simulate the sadness of loss. To appreciate something, you need to sometimes pause for a moment and say, how sad it would be if I didn't have this. How sad it would be if we didn't have this person in our midst. How sad it would be if I didn't have this thing that I love, or whatever, this occasion that I enjoy so much. One has to be able to imagine the sadness of not having in order to fully enjoy the pleasure and the rejoicing of having, of being attached. And that attachment to Yerushalayim requires, if you want to feel attached to Yerushalayim, you have to feel a sense of missing when we don't have a Yerushalayim. You have to feel a sense. If you feel a sense of everything's wonderful, we've got everything we need, we've got a wonderful Yerushalayim, great restaurants, beautiful places to go, it's buzzing, if that's what you feel, then you're not attached to Yerushalayim. If one can go to Yerushalayim, yes, and enjoy everything there is to enjoy there, but at the same time to feel a pang of sadness at what we don't have, as the Shulchan Aruch says in the first parak, which is the topic of this whole piece of Gemara with which we conclude Perek Cheskas Habatim, is to be able to say, I feel a little sad at Hadran Allah Cheskas Habatim. I feel a little bit sad that we're moving on to the next Perek, because I've felt so attached and I've enjoyed this so much. I'm going to miss Cheskas Habatim. That's why at the end of every Perek we say that. I'm actually going to miss Cheskas Habatim. I will love Amoicheres Habayis, the next Perek. I'm sure I will love it as much as I enjoyed Cheskas Habatim, but I'm going to miss Cheskas Habatim, because the more you miss, the more you loved. And one has to put the two together. And it's a comfort for times of loss, to understand that missing is part of the joy of having. And it's a caution, it's a leveling out of excessive joy, just in understanding, thank God I'm enjoying what I've got, but how sad it would be if, God forbid, I didn't have this precious gift that I do have.